Welcome to Building Memories, a heritage audio trail which captures, preserves and shares interesting historical facts and social memories of local people about selected buildings and locations around Leigh Town Centre. This commentary has been edited together from facts and memories supplied and recorded by members of the Healthy Arts Memorably Local History Reminiscence Group, supported by additional historical research completed by Group Facilitator Julie McKiernan. Audio Trail 1. Market Street to Railway Road, starting outside the NatWest Bank and walking north along Market Street.
Our first trail begins at the turnpike in the middle of Leigh, where King Street becomes Market Street and Bradshawgate meets Railway Road. The toll gates and toll house were originally located here until they were moved to Pennington in 1829 to ease congestion. Market Street was the first area of the town to be developed, but was so narrow and winding that if a load of hay was taken through on a cart, the hay would brush each shop on either side. At only 14 feet wide in parts, it certainly couldn't have accommodated the Leigh Carnival parades that Roy Edmondson remembers.
Back in 1966, I was in the Senior Scouts and we decided to put a bivouac on our float, along with a big tin bath full of soapy water. We wore sheepskin rugs for that authentic Stone Age look and held squeezy washing up bottles filled from the tin bath to squirt at each other. When we reached the Turnpike Road, there was a row of policemen blocking off King Street, so we all looked at each other and without a word filled our bottles and soaked all the police in one go as we went past. The crowd loved it, and the police were very good about it. There was no trouble at all.
The Grade 2 listed NatWest building was originally Parr's Bank, designed by Leigh's architect J.C. Prestwich in 1908. It was built on the site of the old White Horse Coaching Inn, which was the posting office and staging post for Leigh. Here you could catch the Chow-Bent Hero to Manchester, the Bolton Union and other coaches. It was also where Leigh's magistrates sat to hear cases against those involved in the Leith Fight of 1839, and where Leigh's first fire station was based. When the inn was demolished in 1900, a new White Horse was built around the corner in Railway Road, currently called Est 1899.
Across the road you will see the modern Turnpike House. In 1964, this building replaced a block of much older properties owned by Walker's Brewery. These included the Rope and Anchor pub, designed by J.C. Prestwich in 1895, which replaced an earlier inn, the Anchor, dating back to at least 1753. One of the earlier pub's landlords was Richard Greenough, licensed victualler and auctioneer, who was to become the first chairman of the Leigh Local Board. A small section of the Rope and Anchor remains in Bradshawgate on the corner of Market Street. Much like today, the rest of the block once contained a wide range of businesses, including the Fleece Hotel, Vose and Son Limited, Tripe Dressers, the Travellers' Rest, the Borough Caff, Roger Bowen and Son, Booksellers and Stationers, and Youds Grocers. Next to the NatWest Bank, you will see the much older Turnpike House. This, along with the property next to it, were built to replace a block of old buildings demolished in 1898 during the much-needed widening of Market Street. The new buildings were built further back, and Sugar Street, a small lane connecting Market Street to Newton Street, became the front line of the new Town Hall in 1907. In J.C. Prestwich's original plans, the Town Hall included a market hall, which explains why he also built 9 shops into the frontage on Market Street. As you walk along, listen to the memories of some of the old shops.
The Barter Shoe Shop was Czech in origin. Its manufacturing premises and shops in the east were taken over by the Nazis during the war and later nationalised under the communists, but the family retained control of works and shops in the west. They are now the world's leading shoemaker with over 5,300 shops in 70 countries, but when and why they left Leigh, I have no idea.
I'm Ralston, and I remember when I was about 12 or 13 years old, I used to look in George Morris's toy shop, which was next door to the opticians and the town hall buildings on Market Street. And I used to look in and I used to see this toy, and it was a sort of a car, a racing car, but it had everything. It had suspensions on it, on the wheels, and it had a track rod steering gear and a differential on the back, and you could take the wheels off and lift the bonnet up and all that. Yeah, but it was everything. But the cost of it was in them days like 10 and sixpence it was. And I looked on this, and it was my birthday, you know. And I persuaded my mother and dad to lash out 10 and sixpence, which to them was one of them days.
Chamley's bookshop and stationers was my idea of heaven, as they stocked every kind of book and also every kind of paper, which smelt fantastic. I would go in just to buy ink for my school fountain pen and browse for over an hour.
At the corner of the town hall, look across at the old building on the right-hand corner of Lord Street. This was formerly the shop of Alfred Danby, draper and outfitter. It survived demolition in 1964 and a previously close shave in the 1930s, when the former Boots building next door was knocked down to widen Lord Street. Danby's employed the old pneumatic cash carrier system of sending money from the counter to the cashier. Notes and coins were placed in pods, which were propelled by a blast of compressed air along tubes to the office, which was raised above the shop floor. Then the pod was sent back to the shop assistant with the correct change. This must have provided light relief for the hundreds of local children who were dragged here to be measured up for their school uniforms. On the opposite left-hand corner of Lord Street stands the Bank Chambers. This replaced a block of old buildings demolished in 1925 during the first widening of Lord Street. Originally, it could only accommodate a horse and cart, so needed to be opened up to newer modes of transport, including cars and buses. The neglected building next door, which used to be Storktown, before, ironically, becoming an undertaker's, is the only survivor from a block of late 18th or early 19th century properties. These used to include the Queen's Arms Public House, originally known as the Roebuck, dating from at least 1720, and Allsop's fruit, vegetables and poultry shop. This was famous for the rabbits and game birds hanging on iron hooks outside, and was nicknamed Allsop's Cathedral, because the registry office upstairs was accessed via a ginnel between the shop and the adjoining Saddle Inn.
The Saddle Inn was nicknamed the Glass Barrel after a large decoration hanging outside, a serious health and safety risk today. Later it became Melody House, the haunt of local aspiring musicians.
Me and my friend Peter Hardy used to go in and try out guitar after guitar, which we couldn't afford and never bought. I did, however, buy my first and only mandolin there. It was run by John Shane, a huge fellow who used to wear a brown suit, had his glasses perched on the end of his nose, and always smoked a big fat cigar.
Accessed via a narrow entry down the side of the Saddle Inn was the Millstone Inn, or Falling Wall. It was here that Richard Arkwright, barber and wigmaker, came to court the landlord's daughter, Margaret Biggins. Another pub regular was the local inventor, Thomas Hayes, whose idea Arkwright stole and patented, making him a millionaire. In recent research, suggests that Hayes did not invent the spinning jenny but the water frame, and this was a more important invention, using first water power and then steam. However, this is something that local historians will probably never agree on.
Doctor's Nook Car Park is named after Richard Guest, the famous man midwife of Leigh, who died in 1815. Its houses, along with the row of shops which formed the east side of Market Place, were demolished in the 1970s to make way for a department store that was never built. Roy Edmondson remembers the origins of a local legend.
When they were knocking down Allsop's fruit and veg shop, one of the digger wheelers went down a hole, which turned out to have been a window into a tunnel that went from St Mary's the Virgin Parish Church as a priest escape route that carried on through the cellar at Collins and Darwell's printers in the old building. I've seen it bricked up on either side of the cellar. It came in and went out the other side. They say that it went on to St Thomas's Church, but the church wouldn't have been built by then.
Sadly, the undercroft of St Mary's Church is now filled with rubble, so there is no evidence of any tunnels. But it was a Roman Catholic church from 1189 to the reign of Henry VIII, so perhaps there is a grain of truth in the legend.
Turn now to face the Civic Square, formerly the Market Square. The original Market Cross, topped by a gilded sun, was replaced by an obelisk in 1762 by Robert Vernon Atherton Gwilym of Atherton Hall, Lord of the Manors of Atherton and Pennington. The Market Square has often been the scene of political unrest and public announcements. The Riot Act was read here twice, the first in 1839 at the time of the Leith Fight, when troops charged around 1,000 protesters who were attempting to shut the mills as part of a campaign to gain voting rights for the working classes. The second was in 1881, during the miners' strike, which lasted 28 weeks, when 15,000 people marched along Church Street, accompanied by soldiers of the 12th Hussars. In 1909, a group of women's social and political union soldiers arrived here. The crowd that gathered to listen was then encouraged to follow them to the Cooperative Hall, where they intended to disrupt a Liberal meeting. The obelisk was moved in 1859 and again in 1986.
The Town Hall, designed by J.C. Prestwich and built in 1907, is Grade 2 listed, bears Leigh's coat of arms and the motto Haequo Pede Propera, which means to make progress steadily. During World War II, one of our former members, Elsie Boydell, used to fireworks from its roof. It has witnessed a lot of public events both inside and outside the building, including visits from King George VI and Queen Elizabeth on May the 18th, 1938, and the Queen and Prince Philip on June the 20th, 1977, but no occasion has been quite so celebrated as that remembered by Keith Hindley.
My fondest memory is of 1971, after returning from Wembley with the Challenge Cup. Alex Murphy appeared at the small balcony with the rest of the team to be greeted by a tumultuous reception of thousands of Leigh people, never to be forgotten.
May 15th, 1971 was my best day out ever. My Uncle Frank got us tickets for the Challenge Cup final at Wembley. We were up very early to catch the special train from Wigan. As we were approaching our destination, another train was running alongside us on another track, full of the blue and yellow colours of Leeds supporters. It became a competition as to who would get to the station first, and they won. Our seats were on the very back row, so we used binoculars to get a better view of the players. Leigh were most definitely the underdogs, but they were on form and definitely the better team. There was a lot of jeering when the Leeds captain, Sid Hines, was sent off for flooring Alex Murphy, who was stretchered off the field. But Leigh continued to play well and there was a massive cheer when Murphy came back on later in the second half. We did wonder whether he'd faked the severity of his injury. The dropped-up goal king kept Leigh edging further ahead, and when the final whistle blew, it was 24-7 to Leigh, a score that no one had dared hope for. I don't remember the journey home, except that we were all ecstatic. The following day, I went with my friends to the front of the town hall to see the team appear on the balcony with the cup. Sadly, it all went downhill after Alex Murphy left the following season.
As you stand here, try to imagine the sights and smells of the old outdoor market, which was held here until March 1968. In its early days, the smells would have been particularly strong from the old butcher's shambles in front of the church wall, which were demolished in 1789, the abattoir in Bengal Street and the various pubs dotted around the area, including the Swan Hotel, the Bluebell Inn, the Boar's Head, the Market Hotel and the King's Head. The outdoor market was open Wednesday morning and all day Friday and Saturday. Here are some memories of the market.
He was very busy whatever the weather, and there was not much cover for the stalls. People had nicknames that they were known by, and hawkers sold pots, china, mugs and plates, all displayed in large wicker baskets.
There were stalls selling stockings and tights, shirts and jerseys, loose razor blades, pork pies, Lancashire cheese, pot herbs, broth mix, savoury duck, and any number of cake stalls selling cut-offs, i.e. ends of baked cakes.
As a girl, we went into town to get broken biscuits from the market. They didn't last long in our house with 7 of us. Later, when I had children, I combed the market for remnants to make clothes for me 3 girls.
There was a fruit and veg stall next to the church wall, and I remember an old lady asking for a pound of bananas. The stallholder weighed them and said, "It's a bit over, love." She said, "I only want a pound." So he had to cut one of the bananas in half and he ate the other half.
The Turnpike Centre, the old King's Arms. When the new Turnpike Centre was built in 1971, part of Newton Street was demolished. This included the site of the old King's Arms, where the 7th Earl of Derby spent his last night before being executed in Bolton on October 17th, 1651. Notice the plaque on the wall of the library. Due to its location opposite the church, the pub was a favourite for funeral teas and wakes. The Turnpike Centre was designed by Ernest Prestwich of J.C. Prestwich and Sons, with a concrete textured relief sculpture by William Mitchell, English sculptor, artist and designer. The building contains the library, an art gallery and the Derby Room, but was originally also meant to include a museum and a theatre.
Walk to the Boar's Head end from the St Mary's Way, passing the church. The medieval building of St Mary the Virgin, which was originally dedicated to St Peter, was demolished in 1870. However, the inner structure of most of the tower survives from 1516, and some of the foundations date back to 1189. The church, its surrounding walls, gates and gateposts, is now Grade 2 listed. The Boar's Head, also Grade 2 listed, was built in 1900 to replace an older building from 1720. It hosted many important meetings for Lord Lilford, Marsh and Calvert, solicitors, and Leigh Cricket Club, amongst others. An old bar behind the pub was used as a theatre for travelling companies. It was later replaced with a 2-storey Grade 2 listed double-decker stables, one of the few left in the country. The old pub was demolished for the widening of Market Street and Leigh Road, then known as Bridge Street, as it crossed Stock-Platt Ditch. Walk around the end of the churchyard between the church and a small supermarket. This was originally called Church Passage. George Flatt's ancestor, William Whittaker, and his family lived at number 5 in 1901.
They came to Lee from Hale in Cheshire in the mid-1870s. William was a bricklayer and his descendants founded Hayman's Builders, who had a reputation for building good homes, particularly in the Hayman Avenue estate in Pennington. William's youngest son Walter had 13 children, 5 of whom were quintuplets, which was very unusual for the time, particularly as they were all female. Sadly, but not surprisingly given medical resources at the time, only one, Harriet Victoria, survived. She was so frail that she had to be pushed around in a cart until she was 5. However, she later emigrated to America and lived to be 93.
At this end of Church Passage stood the Lee Grammar School building from 1719 until it collapsed in 1919. See the plaque on the church gardens wall. Fortunately, the school had already moved to Railway Road in 1889. These buildings had to be cleared and 7,000 bodies exhumed from the parish graveyard at the rear of Church Passage to make way for the new Market Hall in 1968. This purpose-built covered hall with outdoor shops and stalls and underground car park closed in 1989 when the market transferred to the new hall in Albion Street. Walk round the tower end of the church into Bengal Street, cross St Mary's Way to stand at the rear of the Turnpike Centre. Across the road you will see the railings at the back of Lee St Mary's Primary School. Here used to stand the Bengal Street toilets, christened Bones Mansions by locals, after Mr Bond the attendant who ran them. On the 31st of October 1965, Radio 4 broadcast an episode of Down Your Way in which Franklin Engelman visited towns to talk to local residents and play their choice of music.
Some Lee inhabitants were annoyed by the fact that such a large part of the programme concentrated on the newly built Bengal Street toilets. Apparently they were state-of-the-art at the time, having not just modern toilet and washing facilities, but newfangled warm air hand dryers, which unfortunately seemed to take an inordinately long time to get the job done. One other fact that I remember from the programme was that per head of population, Lee was the most savings conscious at the Trustee Savings Bank in the country.
Our former member Francis Bliss remembered that in the 70s and 80s the public toilets in Bengal Street had an attendant who provided a shoe shine service for people who needed their shoes cleaning, and a hot towel if you needed a wash and shave. All these services were in a separate room surrounded by glass.
Continuing along Bengal Street to Railway Road, this section of Railway Road from here to the traffic lights was the full length of the road until it was extended in 1858. The construction started after 1893. The building opposite, set back from the others, was the grammar school from 1889 until 1898. Turning right into Railway Road and continue across Jaffrey Street and Downing Street. In 1907, cast iron verandas with glass roofs were erected over the shops between Downing Street and Ayot Street, and opposite between Rydal Street and Organ Street, and this stretch became known as the Monkey Run. Many young single people promenaded up and down the road looking for talent of the opposite sex. The verandas were removed in the late 1950s, but not before Teresa Hunter made good use of them.
If it rained in Railway Road, you didn't get wet, as they had a veranda, so we used to walk up and down in our teddy boy and girl gear. I bought black drain pipe jeans that I wore with a long coat with a velvet collar. In the 50s there was a cafe with round tables with sewing machine treadles underneath. We used to go in there and drink root beer and think we were getting drunk in a temperance bar. There was a craze at the time for teddy girls and boys to wear sharpened bicycle chains wrapped around their knuckles to make you feel big. So I got one and sharpened it, and someone came and tugged at it and I cut all my fingers. That was my teddy girl era over with. I moved on to bouffant skirts with 6-inch layers of petticoats that we wore for driving in the youth clubs around town.
In this block, a Clements and Spines sandwich shop, now Minster's Electricals, sold a local favourite, the Slappy, which was a large meat and potato pie served in an even larger pound cake. The Journal newspaper, which began in 1784, was also based here from 1907. And at number 56, you would have found Charlie Abbott, herbalist. His interest in herbalism began when he was 17, and the Bolton herbalist cured him of TB. He set up his business on Railway Road in 1911, aged only 21. Despite having no qualifications, he had a lot of patients and a long waiting list, but he had several run-ins with the law over his treatments. His electronic black box, which he claimed could determine from a single drop of blood which herbal medicine was required, was much derided. Then in 1933 he was taken to court over the death of 11-year-old Charles Wrigley Taylor, who he'd been treating for meningitis. Abbott was found innocent and acquitted of manslaughter, and afterwards launched a campaign for official recognition of herbalists. After his death, his fourth wife continued the business until her death.
Look down to the end of the road. At the very end of what is now Railway Road, Westleigh Station on the Bolton and Kenyon line was opened in 1831. Passengers travelling to the station from the centre of town originally had to walk down Twist Lane and then alongside the railway line to reach the station, until in 1858 the railway company paid for Railway Road to be paved. Cross the road to stand outside the former college building. This imposing brick building, completed in 1894, was erected by the Leigh Literary Society, the Leigh Technical School and the Public Library, each with its own entrance at either end of the building. The designers, both members of the society, were J. H. Stephen and J. C. Prestwich. The pupils and staff of Leigh Grammar School moved into the building from 1898 until 1931, and the Pupil Teachers Centre and the Senior Boys School were also based here for some time.
I used to go to the children's library, which was round the back of the library in Railway Road, and down some steps in the basement. It smelt quite dusty and musty, but it opened up a lifetime of enjoyment of books.
I went here on day release when training to be an electrician. One day we did a practical exercise about the storage of electricity and capacitance. This was set up by the lecturer and included a 4-foot wooden pole with a cable connected to a copper bar pointing down at 45 degrees. On the bench about 4 foot from the base of the pole was another copper bar connected to a cable, so there was about 5 foot between the conductors. The lecturer then charged up the capacitor and told everyone to stand back. When he switched it on, it was just like when Frankenstein brings the monster to life. A flash of electricity shot from one point to the other. It was amazing, and we all went away with a very healthy respect for electricity.
When I left Warden Goldstones, I did some courses at Railway Road Tech. My teacher suggested that I did O-levels and A-levels, and then she wrote a letter to get me onto the Literature and History Humanities Honours degree at Bolton. I was 39 when I graduated, and the Journal did an article about me. Say, Leigh housewife says there must be more to life than a kitchen sink.
Walk to the Ullswater Street end of the building. The gym in Ullswater Street opened in 1903. William Edward Marsh donated it to the town to commemorate the long reign of Queen Victoria. The Marsh family lived at Westleigh Hall, which is now the site of the Marsh playing fields on Wigan Road. At the 1920 Olympics in Amsterdam, for the first time women were allowed to compete. Ada Smith and Hilda Smith from the Marsh Gymnasium, who were not related, both won bronze medals for the gymnastics. Continue walking up Railway Road until you reach Wilkinson Street. Wilkinson Street was named after the farmer whose farm was at the end of Railway Road. James Hilton, writer of many screen plays and novels, including Goodbye Mr. Chips and Lost Horizon, was born at number 26 in 1900. The family didn't live in Leigh very long before moving to Cambridge, where James went to school and then to university. Well, there is a small blue plaque acknowledging his birthplace.
Cross over Wilkinson Street. This block was built by George Hanson, who owned and developed much of Railway Road. He was a butcher, and if you look up, you will see a plaster cow's head inscribed AD 1888, which was placed above his shop. Stop at the corner of Cook Street and look across the corner of Back Salford. The building opposite is what remains of the Palace Cinema. Designed by J.C. Prestwick, it opened in 1913 and showed its first talkie in 1929. It became a Gaumont British cinema in 1941 and introduced a junior club for boys and girls with community singing led by the manager, Mr. Uncle Bill Sloane. In 1950, the film Morning Departure was screened, starring Frank Coburn, who was born in Leigh in 1919. The cinema closed in 1957 with the films Doctor at Large and Lovers and Lollipops.
The Palace Cinema was a favourite for me and my girlfriends, but I also remember it has a supermarket, Shoppers World, where I bought my first golf clubs. I managed to win the captain's prize with them at West Orton Golf Club in the early 70s, so they couldn't have been that bad, although I was told that the store was a subsidiary of Woolworths.
Look at the opposite corner of Back Salford. On this site, in 1863, Mr. Wardlow's Theatre opened, later replaced by the Leigh Conservative Club and Assembly Rooms in 1878. By 1880, it had become the Imperial Theatre and Constitutional Assembly Rooms, or SEMS, with seating for 600 people, who were entertained by Jonathan Jonty Dewhurst, Leigh's most famous actor, who later ran the Theatre Royal. Animated pictures were shown from 1905, and after a grand reopening in 1908, it became Leigh's first picture place, with a screening of Scenes at Mather Lane, a recording of a rugby match between Leigh and Australia. Leigh won 14-11. The first talkie was shown here in 1930, and from 1954 children could join the Roy Rogers Club. But the British Thomas Houston projectors were always breaking down, and although it was the first cinema in town to have widescreen, it closed in 1963 with its final feature film, Last of the Vikings.
It had a flat floor, so people used to cast shadows across the screen as they walked across to their seats. I remember being in the SEMS one night when the film caught fire.
The SEMS was only a small cinema. It had a raised area at the back which was called the horse box. There was a patch zone in the bottom left-hand side of the screen where, according to local legend, someone had once sent a rocket off that went straight through it.
I remember my mate and me being underage trying to get into an X-rated film at the SEMS with Brigitte Bardot in it. We were chuffed to bits when they let us in, and we sat right near the front when a very spooky horror film came on. We'd gone a week early. We were frightened to death, but serves us right.
Look across at the large building on the other side of Cook Street. On the corner of Cook Street is a shop, once known as Leigh Bazaar. It was owned by Christopher Cook and sold all manner of goods, including Liberty bodices with rubber buttons. The longer building behind it, running down Cook Street, was originally built to accommodate the Mansley Rope Works, but was vacated in 1870 when a new works was built by the canal. So when the shop opened in 1880, it was 215 foot long, with 200 foot of counters. Cook Street was once a part of Leigh Bus Station, with buses parked up along it.
Cross over Cook Street and walk to the top of Railway Road to finish this trail at the turnpike. All narration and memories were provided by Chris Boyle, Michael Caine, Francis Derbyshire, Lynn and Roy Edmondson, Keith Hindley, Teresa Hunter, Julie McKiernan, Joan Patrick, George Platt, Steve Rogers, Ernie Rothwell, Ralston Whitaker, and Frank and Julie Woodward. The written trails were compiled, edited and recorded by Julie McKiernan. The historical information was researched from Dr. Lund's A History of Leigh, Leigh Local History Publication No. 20, Pubs of Leigh Revisited, Leigh Town Centre Trail, Walks Around Leigh by Richard Bond, Old Leigh Photographs Facebook page, and Archives, Wigan and Leigh. All information was fact-checked by Michael Caine. All modern photographs were produced by Dan Carty. All other images were supplied by Archives, Wigan and Leigh, or other sources identified on the images themselves. The audio trails were edited and produced by Chris Boyle. We would particularly like to thank GMVCO, the Greater Manchester Centre for Voluntary Organisation, for awarding us a GM Mental Wellbeing Small Grant to fund this project.